Good afternoon and welcome everyone at the press center of the Russian MFA. At our regular briefing, we have Russian and foreign journalists with us. I would like to start with a very urgent news. Today, Russian MFA called on the ambassador of Mexico, accredited in Moscow. He was yet again expressed a concern with inaction in the resolution of the situation with a minor Russian citizen, Kristina Romanova. I'll remind you, she is illegally detained in a specialized facility by the Child Services of Mexico. This topic was widely covered by the Russian media. People in charge expressed their opinion about this. We received a lot of questions regarding the situation. So I would like to report on the work that we have done on the diplomatic track. Amid the ignoring of numerous addresses from Russia, the Russian side demanded to ensure immediately the consulate access to the minor. She is the citizen of Russia, and to create all the conditions to her unimpeded return to Russia. Anna Kuznetsova, presidential ombudsman on the rights of the child, Maria Zakharova, is following the situation. Now, about the schedule of the foreign minister of Russia. On April 17th of April, the 9th meeting of the foreign ministers of Russia and Central Asia states is scheduled. The participants will discuss the implementation of the agreements following the second summit in Central Asia, Russia, that took place on October 9th, 2025 in Dushanbe. The participants will exchange opinions on the most relevant issues on interaction between Russia and the Central Asian countries in all region formats. The special attention will be given to security in Central Asia in adjacent areas. They will also talk about the threats of international terrorist groups operating close to our common borders. Amid the stabilization of the situation in the Middle East, the participants of the meeting will also consider all other topics of mutual interest. I announce those events that we haven't mentioned. They add up to the schedule of the foreign minister. Also, Sergei Lavrov will participate in the municipal forum Birthplace is the Power of Russia on April the 20th. The event is expected to be participated by more than 7,000 participants from all over the country, as well as by guests from sister cities from the neighboring countries. The panel discussion, Municipal Diplomacy Amid Global Changes in the World Order. The minister will share Russia's approaches to solving relevant international issues. On April 23rd, the joint meeting of the Supervisory Board and Board of Trustees on Gimo University under the presidency of the minister will take place. The meeting will feature the report about the activities of university for 2025, about the goals for the university, including in terms of its participation in the program Priority 2030. Now let's move to the relevant international agenda. I promised you during the last briefing to share you this. These are historical facts. They are well known. I would like to remind you about one more important historical date, April 23rd. We'll talk about it twice today. I am talking about the April 19th, April 8th, old style on 1783. Back then, the Emperor Catherine II signed the High Manifest on accession of the Crimean Peninsula, the Taman Island and all the Cuban side under the power of Russia. This manifest became an outcome of a century struggle of our country to return the inherently Russian lands. And in line with the federal law number 336 of August 3rd, 2018, this day is declared a memorial date of our history. Under the Russian administration in Crimea, and I mean that historical period that I mentioned in the beginning, Crimea saw deep changes. Slavery was eliminated, state governing system was shaped, Fortress Sebastopol was founded. Accession to Russia, I'm talking about our past, gave a powerful impetus to the development of the whole region. The economy, trade, culture started to immediately grow. New cities and ports appeared. The Russian fleet cemented its positions in the Black Sea, ensuring security of our southern borders. How do you like to hear the words about safety of navigation that our country ensures? It shades a special light to these words, given the current geopolitical realities. We have to value this. Here's a couple of facts. The city of Zaporozhye is founded by the Russian Empire in 1770, Kherson. In 1778, it is founded by the Russian Empire. Mariupol was founded, and I will reiterate, in 1778 by the Russian Empire. Now, for the attention of the new pseudo-historians in Ukraine, when they cancel something, rewrite history. The city of Dnepropetrovsk was founded in 1776, Kryvyi Rog in 1775, Nikolaev in 1789, Odessa. And we'll talk about it today and what is going on there today. It was founded in 1784. Any more comments needed here? This is the history of this land, of these towns and cities. It is not written here as if for the first time. Nothing like that. Everything has history. We have to remember that accession of Crimea to the Russian Empire under Catherine II had even deeper historical roots. In the second half of the 10th century, the eastern part of the peninsula was a part of Tmutarakan Principality, thus becoming a part of the ancient Rus. The ties strengthened after the successful campaign of the great Prince Vladimir in 988 against the city of Korsun, Kherson-Stavrichesky, Byzantine. Even there he was baptized and defined the historic path for our fatherland. Several centuries later, in 1783, the Crimea became a part of the Russian Empire in 2014, following the all-Crimea referendum, impeccable in terms of all international standards. It became an example of democratic expression of will returned to the national to Russia. The results are known for everyone. 96.7% voted in Crimea and 95.6% in Sebastopol voted in favor to rejoining the historical motherland. These are not simple figures. This was the voice of the people. It was heard and supported by Russia. Since then, Crimea has become an integral part of the Russian Federation. Over the last 12 years, the peninsula truly changed. And it's not only about people. Like some people could say that did nothing. People did everything. They they needed and had to, but they were impeded in their aspirations. Now people have this possibility. Infrastructure was updated, large-scale project was implemented, the Crimean Bridge was built. This is the very same bridge that, as you remember, couldn't have built. Energy supplies was established. Tourist capabilities were constructed. Crimea now again has a name of a tourist center. Today, it is not only a very beautiful part of our planet, it is a dynamically developing region of Russia. To sum it up, I'd like to note that the return of the peninsula is a natural historical process of both Russia and Russia. It was long and difficult. It was blessed by God, and we are following this path together. Now, about truly, I cannot call it nothing but plague in the context of what is going on right now in Ukraine, around Ukraine. But I will also call it a brown plague. The Kiev neo-Nazi regime continues terror attacks against civilians and civil infrastructure of Russia. The Easter truce declared by the President of Russia was no exception. During 32 hours that it was established on April 11th through 12th, the armed forces of Ukraine violated the ceasefire regime at least 6,500 times. Over the last week, some 200 Russian citizens suffered from the Ukrainian Nazis. At least 172 of them were wounded, including 12 children. 31 persons was killed, including 5 minors. Now, about certain facts. The Belgorod region. On April the 9th, drone attacked in the Shebekino district 9 people. In Nezhegod, a 15-year-old girl was wounded. On April 11th, the Grod MLRS and drones attacked 11 private houses. 6 people sustained fragment wounded. In the Bryansk region, on April the 9th, in the village of Belaya Berezka, drone killed an 82-year-old local man. On April 10th, in the village of Urasovo, Neptune missile attack damaged on almost 20 houses. 4 of them cannot be rebuilt. 1 woman was wounded. DPR. On April 9th through 11th, on these very days, right in the run-up to Easter, in Gorlovka, Dokuchaevsk, Donetsk, Dmitrov, Yasanovataya, drone attacks and the detonation of explosives wounded more than 20 people. 3 out of them, including 1 child, were killed. He was 12 years old. The Zaporozhye region. On April 11th through 12th, armed forces of Ukraine attacked various settlements. 3 civilians were killed, 9 wounded. The Krasnodar region. On April the 9th, in the village of Saukdere, following a drone attack against a multi-story house, 1 person was killed, 1 more wounded. On April the 15th, a terror attack against residential houses in Tuapse claimed lives of 2 minors of 5 and 14 years. 2 adults were wounded. Kursk region. On April 11th in Lvov, a drone attacked a gas station. 1 one-year-old boy was wounded, as well as 2 adults. The Lipetsk region in Yelet on April 14th, drones killed 1 woman and wounded 5 people. LPR on April 11th in the village of Svistinovka, a drone killed the driver of the cargo vehicle. The Kherson region. And on April 9th in the village of Kostogrizovo, a motor bicycle hit a mine and killing 1 15-year-old boy. On April 11th through 12th in Ryadansk and Veliki Kopani, the explosive detonated and wounded 3 civilians and killing 1. Russian law enforcers continue collect proof and bring to justice the militants and foreign mercenaries. For terror attacks in the Bryansk region, life sentences were given to a few militants: Alexander Klimovets, Konstantin Gulaevsky, drone operators Andrei Tsit and Sergei Zanich were arrested in their absentia. For terror attacks in the Kursk region, Sergei Doroshenko, Yuri Musienko, and Denis Solovyov and Ivan Forstanov were detained and subject to investigation. For participation in hostilities, 13 years in prison were given to Khabazi, the citizen of Georgia. He is wanted internationally. On April 14th, Berlin was visited by Zelensky for consultations with the German leadership. Following it, 10 treaties were signed. The Germany agreed on a new military package worth 4 billion euros. They agreed about investments worth 300 million euros. And this money will not go for agriculture or any other purposes, but they will be allocated for long-range armaments. Berlin also decided to allocate money for several hundred of missiles of Patriot systems and provide 36 Iris-T launchers that they produced. This so-called lethal generosity caused Zelensky's poorly hidden excitement. He called Germany, what do you think? He called it the main partner of Ukrainian defense. In sane words, Germany is the main Zelensky's partner to marginalize the citizens of Ukraine. Germany turned into a main sponsor of war and militarization of Ukraine. This is shown in the means that Germany allocated for the needs of Ukraine, about 55 billion euros. If you talk to the representatives of the German business, medium, small or large, they will tell you how much they need this money themselves. This money could have helped the prosperity in Ukraine. By the prosperity of Ukraine for those who in Berlin was somehow applies to only to the part under the earth. That's how they see these flowers.
Those flowers of evil. In 2026, they're also planning in Berlin to provide an additional 11.5 billion euros. An additional bonus for Kiev was represented by a stated intention of Berlin to facilitate the return Ukrainian asylum seekers in Germany, to help Ukraine and ensure its defensibility and integrity. However, such presents were not free. In return, it's obvious that Zelensky was required to make the mobilization even more harsh, to murder the citizens of Ukraine at the expense of decreasing the age of recruitment and recruiting women, and also at the expense of providing access to natural resources. Agreements with Berlin in regards to the cooperation in exploration of Ukrainian mineral resources was also reached during the aforementioned consultations. That's just a blood business at the expense of citizens of Ukraine. Not only Ukrainian citizens, by the fact they're providing armaments and funds to militarize Ukraine, and to pay for that, Ukraine pays in their natural resources and in the lives of their own people. Against the backdrop of the colossal twisting of facts or silencing of facts or spread outright lies, we see the events that demand another comment, comment about Bucha. The April 2022 cynical false flag operation in Bucha. I would like to point out several facts. On the 31st of March in Kiev, there was a congregation of EU representatives dedicated to another anniversary of this provocation. And we mentioned it during one of our previous briefings. And they competed with each other. I mean, the EU representatives, they competed in lying and desire to smear Russia. They provided some alleged details about what had happened. They told stories, imaginative stories, on how the Russian army allegedly was killing people in the street, killing the residents of Bucha, that were killing them in the palisades, how people were being burned alive, how they were thrown into sewers, into the and this nonsense was spread around and around, and all this information should have created an impression that they knew where the corpses came from, how they were distributed in public places, and why, after the conclusion of the filming, why some of the corpses were moving and breathing. They should have answered this question instead, but they didn't. Why was that? And because this is all nonsense that we are seeing. They continue to hide the real facts from the world community in regards to what really happened there. And why am I talking about some nuances? We are regularly making comments about this, that there's some new information appearing every day confirming that this was a terrible false flag operation, but what's worse, that it's continuing up to this day. It's continuing not only in the absolutely crazed minds of those who were responsible for it, that this false flag continues in even more horrible key. The witnesses of this false flag operation, the living witnesses, they are like a bone in the throat of those who want to hide the truth. In Bucha, the neo-Nazi regime conducted especially heinous forced mobilization with the view to send all the witnesses of those events that took place for their certain death. The very residents of Bucha tried to use any means at their disposal to evade capture of these people catchers. But in this situation, the local recruitment office in Bucha literally was drowned in corruption. A worthwhile thing to note that the visit of European officials in March, there were headlines that the corruption scandals resulted in sending to the front of employees and heads of the local territorial recruitment authorities. So they sent them to the front in the full complement. Currently, we don't see this as a usual occurrence when people that have been caught in for bribes and embezzlement to be sent in the assault squads. We don't see this tendency. So at least if they don't know anything about the evil doings of the neo-Nazi upper echelons, so we have a presumption that the terrible events of spring 2022 are still continuing up to this day. This is developing story because they're trying to rid themselves of any witnesses of what really happened back in 2022. Recently, Zelensky signed a new law about a new system of military training of Ukrainian citizens in schools and universities. It presupposed the creation of specialized centers of training, which will be obligatory for all school children and students, and they will be trained not by teachers. They will be trained by the very few militants that have only just committed heinous acts on the front line. So there will be training exercises on, for example, military medicine and shooting training at shooting ranges. So we're talking about this slow-paced indoctrination of the entire population of the country and turning into a country into a military camp. So we've been talking about this for many years, and people told us that we were just unnecessarily making things seem worse than they are. That such things exist all around the world. And we did this not to smear Ukraine any further. We just reported on the very things that we see before every rise, every day. By introducing this project of training citizens in the military corps ever since school, the Ukrainian authorities create a whole system of indoctrination and recruitment of adolescents, which will have far-reaching consequences. Remember about slogans about the Muscovites and whatever. That's the way they were preparing their own population. They were preparing children and adolescents for what's going on right now. And some time has passed, and all those people that received this indoctrination on the part of Kiev regime by Poroshenko, by Tagnibok, Yatsenyuk, and other personalities, it was their turn to become prey to the territorial recruitment offices, and they were sent not to defend Ukraine. They were sent to protect the terrible money laundering and corruption embezzlement mechanism favoring the Western corruption schemes. And the current fighting generation that is being completely massacred by the Kiev regime will be replaced by a new one, completely brainwashed and ready for the struggle and the diversionary work. The Ukrainian youth is being prepared to fight Russia for many years in the future, and to fight. And I didn't say it wrong. They have a very long-term plans. Remember the tourney of Zelensky in the Persian Gulf countries? He was offering them a lot. What does he have to offer? He offered the experience of his militants that have been trained in murder, that they have no conscience, no idea of the international humanitarian law or human rights. What did he offer then? If he is asking for weapons, what he has to offer? He offered them the citizens of Ukraine. He also introduced and sold them, traded them. When he also does that while talking to the terrorist groups in Africa. That's why 3 African countries ruptured and completely ended their communication with Ukraine due to the fact that the Kiev regime has been supplying terrorists in the African continent. So that's just a brief overview of what the Kiev regime has been doing. Their reach is quite global in the nefarious affairs. Under the guise of a so-called patriotic upbringing, the new generation will be taught the Nazi ideology and xenophobia. together with the terroristic means of conducting warfare, there are some historical similarities to be made to the Hitler-Jugend movement, where the adolescents were made obedient fanatics. Zelensky is deliberately turning Ukraine into a military instrument against Russia, and its people is being turned into service personnel for the AFU to implement the Banderite concept of war until the last Ukrainian. They are even ready to send children to the front lines. The centers of training that are receiving children from age 10. And we already talked about this. For example, we mentioned the camp called Azovets, where children are being indoctrinated with neo-Nazi ideology. And they are also glorifying Nazi collaborators there. That's what currently the things are. They are glorifying the images of criminals, and this misanthropic ideology is being supported at state level, primarily at the state level in Ukraine. The glorification of Nazis, including Hitler, is being done openly. We already saw that the head of the Ukrainian Institute of the so-called National Memory, Alexander Alferov, publicly expressed his admiration for Hitler, calling him, and I quote, an educated and cultured man that has been brought up in the spirit of philosophy. On what philosophy was he brought up? It wasn't clear. At the same time, Mr. Alferov publicly smeared the Russian people and in the spirit of the rhetoric of Hitler and his accomplices. The founder and the head of one of the militarized groups of the Kiev regime, the so-called Russian Volunteer Corps, Denis Kapustin, in his interview, gave a positive evaluation of Nazi ideology and also admired Hitler, claiming that he was a good leader for his people. And the German people suffered a lot from Hitler in all senses of the word. He neglected to mention that in his interview. We need to remember that, and they don't know about this, they have been indoctrinated. All those participants of the criminal activity done by the Kiev regime, they should have remembered, and we shouldn't have forgotten. Those that have been ushered into ghettos in Germany at the end of the 30s and 40s, they were German citizens. They weren't criminals that have somehow snuck into the country. They weren't any sleeper cells or saboteurs. They were citizens of Germany, of their own country. So Hitler has done a lot for his country. So that's just a brief comment on that. We are mentioning this almost every time. Together with the ideological indoctrination of their own population, the Kiev regime, according to our data, is broadening the scopes of the information propaganda campaign to form the twisted image of Russia among the world community, to grow anti-Russian sentiments. They are focusing on the promotion of utterly false ideas, on the attempts of Russia to rewrite history. Is it us who is trying to rewrite history? Is it really that? Is it really the case? They're also accusing us of trying to destroy the language and cultural identity of the Ukrainian people. How would we want to do that? What are we doing to be accused of that? They're also saying that, according to the information that characterizes the plans of these ideologues, they say that we are trying to forcibly Russificate the residents of the new regions. So we're trying to Russify the people that have been speaking Russian their entire life and were voting to create a law about this official status of Russian English. Are those people being forcibly converted into Russian speakers since they've been speaking Russian their whole life? This will be the focus of their efforts to create a narrative that Russia is allegedly trying to militarize the conscience of children and adolescents. Everything that they have going on in the Azovets children camp is actually applicable to Russia, that we are going to militarize our youth. They are also spreading fakes about events going on in the educational establishment in Russia. The Zelensky regime doesn't stop their attempts to accuse Russia of crimes that they are knowingly committing against the residents in their controlled territories. They are also planning to use Ukrainian diaspora throughout the entire world for their goals. I would like to once again mention one important moment. We are not making anything up. We are only quoting the decisions and resolutions being made in Ukraine right now. I'm not talking about the Ukrainian people, but the leadership of the country. In Ukraine, we see a continued discrimination of residents according to the language. Primarily, this concerns Russian-speaking citizens. The representative of the language ombudsman, Yelena Ivanovskaya, in Ukraine, that has been called many names for everything that she's done. She's been called Sprachenführer, for example. So her representative, called Anna Nerush, on the eve of the tourist season, has demanded. Guess what? Guess what did she demand? That she said that they needed to follow the example of the city administration of Kiev, Vinnytsia, Cherkasy, Ternopil, and Belaya Tserkov, Dnipropetrovsk that have previously established a moratorium on the use of the Russian cultural product. What exactly are they talking about, saying the Russian cultural product? And they also proposed to introduce a ban on the use of Russian language in a 100% Russian-speaking city of Odessa. Perhaps she is forgetting that somebody else founded this city, not Catherine II, the Russian empress. No. Why is her monument standing in the central square? If you can simply cancel a person in the history of the city, if you can cancel the founder of the city, perhaps they think themselves capable of canceling the language. The very same Anna Nerush claimed that for Odessa, for the tourist season, this is essential necessity. How can you have a vacation there if people are speaking Russian around you? Truly. And she developed her statement adding that people from other regions will be coming to Odessa. And, let's be frank, she said, for them, for residents of other regions, the situation with such preponderance of Russian language is atypical. This is the anti-utopia from the 20th century. This is an absurd tale, almost theatrical in characters. Throwing us back to the theatrical performances and the dominating style back at that age. So the representative of the Sprachenführer, Madame Ivanovskaya, is very concerned about the vulnerable mental state of the residents of the western regions of the country that are suffering and cannot stand Russian music or see the announcements of Russian performances, even if everything was made in Ukraine. And I would like to remind everyone that Article 10 of Constitution guarantees, and I quote from their own Constitution, the supreme law, and a direct quote is that it guarantees the free use and protection of the Russian language.
At the same time, the opinion of people in Odessa who are used to speak their native language, the Russian language, to develop culture in the Russian language, is of no concern to the Kiev regime. An absurd idea was expressed in the address to Vladimir Zelensky, the language activist Svetoslav Litinsky. He was outraged by the Russian obscene words in Lvov. That is a common place there. I would like to warn you. So, Svetoslav Litinsky, one more time, was outraged by the Russian obscene words. Oh my God. And I would like to prompt the presidential office of Ukraine. You'd better send Svetoslav Litinsky to the front line. He would be outraged and surprised by what language the Ukrainian soldiers use there. This very Svetoslav Litinsky suggested to substitute not the Russian language with the Ukrainian language. No, he suggested to substitute the Russian obscene words with Ukrainian similar words. You'd ask where one can learn them, and I'll tell you, there are none. But the Ukrainian Rada should have a commission or a special committee and appoint the envoys to work out these words that would substitute Russian obscene words. This is worse than absurdity. No one says that obscene words are something good. No. What is going on in Ukraine is a total frenzy. It is the mockery of the history and culture of their own people. That would be okay if Svetoslav Litinsky said that it is a bad thing to use obscene words and they should be abandoned. But no, he doesn't say that. He says that it is okay to swear in the native language, in Ukrainian. This is a personal opinion of a particular citizen, but there's a nuance. First of all, he has political ambitions, but he's also a great friend of Vladimir Zelensky. Ukrainian actor and TV host Sergei Prytula. He expressed his approach to the language education of children. Sergei Prytula says, I quote, "All Russian, as he said, should be cancelled." From the he continues, not to let it grow, because sooner or later it will kill. What does this mean? It will kill. The Russian language is going to kill the person who's speaking it. Probably he should have followed up on his idea. Or the Ukrainian soldier is going to kill you, but this is another issue, it's another problem, another tale, so to say. That is my duty as a father to educate my child, he said. Every child in Ukraine should know, avoid Russia, or help somebody else to avoid Russia, support the ban on everything Russia, because, he says, this is your path to survival. End of quote. I would say that this is the logic of a barbarian, but I would not want to insult barbarians. They did not deserve to be compared to Mr. Prytula. But there are people who I would like to compare him with. First of all, this is the youth policy and those who implemented it in the Third Reich. There was a policy called Deutsch Denken und Deutsch Handeln. In German, in English, it's to think German and to act German. For a child, for a person who live in some social and language space, it would be okay to say that our country belongs, our family belongs to this or that culture, language, or religious culture. But this was not the culture to preserve their own identity. This was the policy to destroy the cultural identity and national identity of other peoples. This is something to remember. One more important thing. When they spoke that, when they said think German, act German, they did not mean the great German culture, poets, composers, painters, architects. No, they meant something else. They meant the Nazi mindset and human hatred ideology. That's how people should have thought. At the same time, Ukraine sees more discrimination of the Russian language in medicine under the motto, no language, no treatment. Here's quite difficult information to understand, to grasp. Now you can understand who is considered to be patients there. During the previous briefing, we talked about outrageous fact of non-providing medical aid if it is asked for in Russian. Everyone understands this, ask for help, but it is prohibited. One such case happened to a young woman who tried to call ambulance to her father with a stroke, but operator refused to take a call until she spoke in Ukrainian. Probably the Hippocratic oath in Ukraine exists only for the Ukrainian-speaking patients. Second case happened in March in the private clinic in Lvov, where a Russian-speaking patient was denied appointment. The response of the representatives of the Kiev regime is of note. The president of the Lvov Regional Council, Yuri Holod, called it, what do you think he called it? That it is an outrageous, anti-humane, shameful fact that should have been washed away, that the ombudsman on human rights and public activists should be involved. No, he said the opposite thing. He called it, and I quote, an example of resilient, of a mature and socially responsible Ukrainian business. And Yelena Ivanovska thanked the employee in the Lvov clinic, noting what her trait? Resilience in the situation of the pressure. I don't know. There's only one thing left to be done to establish a word and to give it to everyone who speaks English, only who speaks Ukrainian, only Ukrainian. The discrimination of the citizens in terms of language is a shame for any society. This shows that the Nazism is taking root at the national, at the state level. However, the overwhelming majority of the people in Ukraine continue to use Russian in daily life. Vice Premier on Humanitarian Policy, Minister of Culture Tatiana Berezhnaya stated with bitterness that the Russian language content is watched about 71% of the people in the country. The teenagers listen to the Russian language music, watch video in the Russian language. However, the officials of Zelensky refused to recognize that the Russian language is not only popular, It is native for millions of people in Ukraine. They make up stories that Russian is popular in Ukraine simply because of the algorithm in the social networks. And there are no high-quality Ukrainian alternative. They're going to come up with Ukrainian swear words, and that will be a start of a new era. We'll see how fast the draft is taking place in Ukraine. This shows how cynical and inhumane are the attempts of a number of neo-Nazis that usurped their power in Kiev to change with force the language identity of people in the country. At the state level, not only do they deny the historical right of people to use the Russian language enshrined in the constitution, they essentially call people second-rate people. The president of Ukraine said that everyone who speaks Russian should speak Russian. And as president, later on, he said and green-lighted that this is not only the Russian language, but it is the Ukrainian Russian language, and everything will be okay. And then happened something that what Pritula mentioned, that people are brainwashed. Indeed, this is following suit the Nazis in their manner of actions. During the occupation of Lvov, there were signs on shops, hospitals, trams. Do you know what? For Germans only. But what now? The ideology is the same. It seems to me that the students surpassed the master. Hitlerites abused somebody else's population. The Kiev regime abused their own people. These facts and all the fact that we are going to talk about today confirm the relevance of the goals to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine and to remove the threats coming from its territory. All of them will be achieved, as the Russian authorities said many times. Yesterday, on April 15th, Berlin saw the 34th meeting of the so-called contact group on defense facilitation to Ukraine. It took place online with the participation of the defense minister of Ukraine, Mikhail Fedorov, and under the presidency of his German and British counterparts, Pistorius and Healy. The head of Pentagon ignored the meeting. The commander of NATO forces in Europe, Alexis Grinkevich, was absent too. The tone of the discussion was set by Mark Rutte. He insisted on providing additional $60 billion. Any means from the EU loan to support Ukraine should be in addition, Rutte said, to what allies provide on the bilateral basis. At the same time, he talked about uneven distribution of expenditure on Ukraine among member states of the alliance. These are seemingly fairy tales for children that describe an attempt of the evil to prevail, but this happened in reality. What he said, I quote, "This is indeed a problem. a few countries bear the most of the burden. We should solve that. Support of Ukrainian struggle is important as ever, he said. His calls did not widely resonate with those in presence. Only few of them hurried to provide more money for the growing appetites of the Kiev regime. We named the surnames, established that huge money is laundered through the presidential office and goes back to those countries. And more Ukrainian people are going to be killed on the front lines. Only those who were called frenzied hawks, who want to prolong the conflict and escalate it, responded. For example, Norway. It has always supported human rights. They decided to allocate more than 500 million pounds for drones for Ukraine and 150 million pounds for logistics. The Netherlands promised to procure drones worth more than 200 million euros. Great Britain confirmed their aspiration to provide Ukraine with 120,000 drones. How are they going to be used? People in Great Britain don't tell people in their country how these are used to kill civilians, teachers, doctors, medical workers. They don't tell how children are killed and maimed. This is not shown on TV. BBC, for some reason, did not make any film how these drones or weapons supplied to Kiev are used to kill civilians. I remember very well how BBC was concerned with a very critical issue of football hooligans, as they called them, who behave badly sometimes and inappropriately. They cared about this very much, how the situation with this is in Russia. They made a film about it. They were outraged by everything in Russia. They didn't like anything. We held the Olympiads badly, and so on and so forth. But I would like to ask the BBC TV channel, where's your high standards about human rights, freedoms? Where's what about the humanitarian criteria on human rights standards when it comes to the behavior of Ukraine? Probably it would be good to make one story about this. The British weapons are supplies to Ukraine. Yet again, Great Britain reconfirmed their aspiration to provide Ukraine with 120,000 drones. Only over this Easter week, a lot of people were killed with the use of these very drones. There's a funny thing.
When we were talking about Zelensky's journey in the Middle East, what was he offering the Persian Gulf states? Of course, UAVs. He told them that Ukraine had so many beautiful Ukrainian UAVs, and as soon as they conclude a contract with him, they will immediately win. But it turns out that it is the UK who supplies Zelensky with UAVs. Very interesting turn of events. In the Western arrangement, Belgium, Canada, Estonia, Belgium, Lithuania, Estonia, the locomotives in regards to the economy, not suffering from any demographic issues, of course, are intending to contribute additionally to the implementation of the PURL initiative for Kiev. So those 4 countries, namely Belgium, Canada, Lithuania, and Estonia, have probably exhausted all the important items on the agenda, and only the contribution to Ukraine is left to accomplish all their goals. This is another testament of any that there's no any obvious desire to conclude peace on the part of Zelensky and his Western allies by sponsoring the AFU directly or indirectly. The participants of the Ramstein format are fully accountable for any deaths and injuries of our citizens, any destruction of civilian dwellings and other facilities of civilian infrastructure that are being perpetrated with the use of their armaments. In regards to the victims of those acts, you can hear about this in detail if you participate in the briefing, a quarterly briefing of the Ambassador at Large of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Rodion Miroshnik, that will take place on 24th of April this year at 10 a.m. in the MFA Press Center. You can join through online format. It will be dedicated to the crimes of the Kiev regime against the civilian population of the Russian Federation, and this will be covering the period from January to March this year. This will be conducted in online format. The broadcast will be done in the web portal of the Russian MFA and through our official media accounts. It will be interpreted into different languages, into English, French, and Spanish. And for journalists wishing to get accredited, we will be placing links, corresponding links in the text of our briefing. We see the midterms in the US approaching, and we have certain omens, certain in regards, for example, if there was snow, that the summer will be cool, and if the spring is sunny, the harvest will be rich. So there are some premonitions and omens. We have gathered dozens of them throughout the recent decades. If the elections in the US are approaching, no matter the presidential or Congress election, what should one expect? One should expect a statement accusing Russia of alleged interference into those elections. And the second premonition, in development of the first one, there will be surely talks. Just wait, just wait. And we already heard the first precursors of this. On regards to some alleged cyber attacks, the favorite subject of them. So the midterms are approaching, and in Washington, I think at the behest of the deep state, we see once again the favorite narrative called blame the Russians. They have launched the very familiar narrative that we hear from 2016 on, that this is a very old record. This is a very that has been played too many times, and once again we hear about cyber attacks linked to the hacking group FancyBet sponsored by Russian special services. So it's just a clear indicator, because the election campaign is about to start for the November elections to Congress. And this is not a deja vu, it's powerful premonition of the United States. We see as the statements of the United States about some malicious operations of Russian special services and information state as démarche that is reproducing the standard Russophobic schemes of Biden administration. There is no proof, of course, not a single file, and a single line of code, nothing like IP address. Of course, the goal is to impede the current administration to improve the cooperation with Moscow, especially in the issues of information security. In this context, we'd like to remind the American side regarding the existence of special mechanisms of operative contact to clarify the sources and the circumstances of computer attacks. We are talking about the global intergovernmental registry of 24/7 contact points of the UN, where the US participates along with other 120 countries. It is telling that there have been no requests done through the contact point network regarding this incident, this alleged incident. This once again confirms that the accusers are not interested in an official investigation, only just trying to create artificial hysteria around the Russian threat in the digital space. The resource of the register that I just mentioned is being used in any attempt to interfere in the Russian information infrastructure. However, the competent authorities of the United States are evading such interaction. Against this backdrop, the growth of tension in regards to international security is still primarily caused by the NATO policy, and especially the United States that have confirmed in their March strategy of cybersecurity. They confirmed that they intend to further militarize the information communications sphere. While Washington accuses Moscow of some wrongdoing, the Ukrainian cyber criminals, with the support of Western curators, are regularly DDoS attacking the civil infrastructure of Russia. And another piece of news that is truly shocking coming from Serbia, we have noted with indignation the desecration of memorials to the perished Red Army soldiers in the towns of Kragujevac and Požarevac, and also we heard about the vandalization of the bust of Georgy Zhukov. We knew through decades, we've always known that the people and the authorities of Serbia are respectful about the memory of those who have died fighting the Brown Plague. We are convinced that this hasn't changed, and such incidents are just some thugs that have no idea about the heroic history of the Soviet and Yugoslav brotherhood that have helped to destroy the Hitlerite war machine. I saw that the Serbian law enforcement agencies have started the investigation, and we hope that this will honor the memory of those who have fought shoulder to shoulder against the Nazis. Another important date is upcoming. On the 18th of April, we will be marking the 65th anniversary of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, which has become one of the main sources of modern diplomatic law. The convention was adopted on the 18th of April 1961 as a result of the UN conference. The conference lasted for 5 weeks, and the convention that resulted in from this conference is in a collection of the world experience of diplomatic conversation gathered through centuries. It's an example of the systematization of the corresponding practice, which is testified by the participation of almost all UN members in the convention. The recognition was also paid to due recognition was also paid to the to the Soviet delegation led by Grigory Tunkin, a prominent Russian legislator and specialist in international law. One moment, please. The convention was a foundation for the development of other key international legal instruments in the area of foreign relations, including the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations of 1963, the Convention on Special Missions of 1969, the Convention on the Missions of States in the relations with International Organization of Universal Character of 1975. 2 years ago, at our behest, there was a convention site on the legal status of delegation being sent into the CIS countries that was also modeled after the Vienna Convention. Russia has always viewed the 1961 Convention as one of the very important applied instruments of international law, and its 65 years of operations became a foundation for the work of all diplomatic missions around the world. And we would like to separately mention the preamble of the convention with the following thesis: that it is serving to contribute to the development of friendly relations among nations irrespective of the different constitutional social systems. A bright illustration of the worldwide recognition and relevance of the convention is the fact that despite the difficult geopolitical situation, not a single country yet has stated that they intend to leave this universal agreement. On the contrary, the number of states that have joined the convention has grown threefold in the recent years, from 61 to 193. With that, in the recent years, we have forced to state that a number of cases where some actions of countries taking in favor of some short-sighted national interest with them in mind are running contrary to the spirit and letter of the convention. And this primarily concerns the countries that have done unfriendly actions towards Russia, that are more and more frequently violating their obligations according to the convention in regards to the limitation of the number, of the complement of the diplomatic missions, and the protection of the dwellings, the respect of the person, and the dignity and the right for freedom of movement of Russian diplomats. Especially we have to mention that regard the countries of the European Union are gross violation of this convention. And also they have grown accustomed to unjustifiably deprive people from the privileges and immunities, and they have been rejecting providing good environment for the work abroad. At the same time, trying to justify some extraditions of our diplomats, they have been regularly abusing separate provisions of the treaty, especially the rights of the states to declare a person in some extraordinary circumstances a persona non grata. They sometimes are seizing diplomatic property of the Russian Federation. For example, we saw such examples in the United States of some properties being seized. Such steps are negatively influencing the normal activity of the Russian foreign mission, especially their capability of fully protecting the interests of our countries. And the diplomatic immunity, according to the convention, is intended not for personal profit, but to ensure the effective conduct of the functions of diplomatic missions as bodies representing the states. These unfriendly steps are practically leading to an undermining of the authority of the convention and are watering down its reunifying character. We hope that the world community will be able to overcome this difficult period for the convention when it's being constantly tested for durability. We call on countries to return to the positive experience of applying this universal document. Russia has a very extended network of diplomatic missions abroad, is committed to the provisions of the convention, building its diplomatic relations, especially adhering to the principle of mutuality. One more important topic, we are once again mentioning April the 19th. We see the day approaching when we will be remembering we'll be marking the day of remembering the victims of the genocide of Soviet people that has been committed by Nazis and their collaborators during the Great Patriotic War in 1941-1945. This step was necessary to preserve the spiritual link between the generations and to reinforce our moral anchors. According to different data, around 18 million Soviet citizens have fallen victim to the heinous acts of Nazis in the occupied territories, and the memory of those perished is sacred for us. On the other hand, it is high time we had some response measures to some direct attempts of the West to blur the memory about the key fateful events of the past. We are regularly informing you about our steps in that regard during our briefings. On the 9th of April this year, President Putin signed a law on the introduction of a criminal making and rejection or approval of the facts of genocide of the Soviet people a criminal offense. The same goes for the offending the memory of the victims of genocide, Soviet people, and desecration of their memorials in the Russian Federation or abroad. In 1943, the Presidium of the Supreme Council of the USSR issued the law number 39 regarding the measures of punishment for the German fascist villains that have been culpable of murder and torture of the Soviet civil population and captive Red Army soldiers, for spies, traitors to the motherland among the Soviet citizens and their accomplices. This document has become a basis for the very important work to determine and investigate the crimes against the peoples of the USSR. In November 1942, the Supreme Council of the USSR has created the Special State Commission on the Determination and Investigation of evil deeds of German fascist invaders and their accomplices and the damage they've caused. There have been around 250,000 testaments on the crimes of the occupying forces, and there have been 56 reports on the malicious acts conducted in territory of the USSR. According to information, just think of it, 1,710 towns and villages and large villages, around 70,000 villages were burned, and 6 million buildings were destroyed. 25 million people were left without shelter. This is a veritable catastrophe, and it shouldn't be repeated anywhere in the world. In a corresponding note of the People's Commissar of the Foreign Affairs of the USSR, Vyacheslav Molotov, of April 27, 1942, entitled regarding the monstrous deeds, acts of violence of German fascist invaders in the occupied Soviet regions and the accountability of German government and command for these crimes, addressed to the UK's ambassador to the USSR, Mr. Archibald Kerr, clearly characterized the Nazi Germany policy in regards to the peoples of the USSR. In particular, it was pointed out that the plans and orders received by the German imperialist invaders presupposed complete despoiling of the population of our countries, complete destruction of cities and villages, the capture of land, slave labor, and the forcible capture of population to be brought to Germany for forced work, the liquidation of the Russian national culture, national cultures of the people of the Soviet Union, the extermination of the Soviet population, POWs and partisans through bloody violence and mass killings of Soviet citizens. One more example, in the Leningrad City Commission Act in regards to the damage committed by the German invaders during the war and the blockade. There have been official facts established that the German invaders, in violation of the International Convention, consciously exterminated the peaceful population of Leningrad. And when we're talking about genocide, how is it different from murder, of different cruel acts in this conscious effort and the planned character of the extermination of the civilian population?
Так вот. These documents said that the extermination of the civilians in Leningrad were killed through a hunger siege, exterminated by bombings and artillery shellings. The German artillerists, I quote, with unprecedented cynicism and violence, shelled public places, the most populated intersections, tram stops, parks and gardens. I read these lines about those events that happened 85 years ago. Do you know what I see before my eyes? The shellings of Donetsk, the cities of Donbass. These are examples from the recent past, when they considered by the Kiev regime their own. They just in the same way shelled markets, squares, liked to target children. Why? No, it's no coincidence. This is an ideological heritage of the Nazi ideology by the Ukrainian fighters. These facts are regularly brought up, including today's briefing. On October 20, 2022, St. Petersburg City Court ruled in favor of the General Prosecutor's Office of the Russian Federation and recognized the siege of Leningrad by the occupation authorities of Germany and their accomplices in the period of September 8, 1941 until January 27, 1944, a military crime, a crime against humanity and genocide of national and ethnic groups comprising the population of the USSR, the peoples of the Soviet Union, end of quote. The entities of the Russian Federation have 34 such court rulings. At the international arena, Russian MFA systematically work for the international recognition of the genocide of the Soviet people. Relevant wordings exist in the CIS and CSTO documents. The idea about the genocide of the USSR peoples was reflected in the statement of the Group of Friends to Protect the UN Charter at the meeting of the UN General Assembly in remembrance about the victims of World War II on May 7, 2025. Annually, on April 19th, all Russian educational institutions hold events, the Day of Unified Actions in the memory of the genocide of the Soviet people during the Great Patriotic War. The goal is to preserve the historic truth about the crimes of Nazis and their accomplices. Our colleagues abroad in Russian diplomatic missions systematically implement a large-scale memorial program. Diplomats tend the burial sites of liberators, care for the monuments to Red Army soldiers, protect the historical truth. And over all these years, with a special feeling, warmth and care, they have supported they have maintained ties with our compatriots abroad, with children, victims of concentration camps, not only with our veterans, but with the veterans in various countries who fought with our soldiers back then. All of this is easier to be accessed at the MFA accounts and social networks. In the run-up to April 19th, the day of the remembrance of the victims of genocide, we launched a large-scale information campaign under the motto, without statute of limitation. The web portal of the ministry established a section dedicated to the genocide of the Soviet people with archived materials, documented testimonies, and statements of leading historians. The resources of the ministry almost daily publish unique, detailed historical materials with fact and references to archived documents speaks about various aspects of the genocide committed by Nazis and their henchmen. I can also announce that on April 19, Sergei Lavrov, we will publish the address of Sergei Lavrov dedicated to this day. Under the Convention of the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime and Genocide, genocide is acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. This notion includes 5 key categories, killing members of the group, causing them serious bodily or mental harm, imposing living conditions intended to destroy the group, preventing births of the group, and forcibly transferring children out of the group. Against the people on the occupied territories of the Soviet Union, Nazis and their henchmen and collaborationists used all 5 officially classified forms of genocide. That's why when we hear the dismissive words from the Westerners that they say, you exaggerate, and they are also often expressed by the descendants of the Nazis who killed the Soviet soldiers. I quote, vacating living space, end of quote. We can recommend these people study real facts in history, and they speak unequivocally. The Third Reich meticulously planned and systemically committed genocide on the occupied territories. Those who know nothing from history ignore its history attempts to rewrite the history. I would like to ask them to remember the inappropriate smiles of the then German Chancellor Olaf Scholz about the genocide against the people in Donbass by the Kiev regime. Do you remember early 2022? The lawyers will have to work a lot. The proof that the Kiev regime destroyed Russian and Russian-speaking people are numerous. But the history already pronounced its verdict to these people from the presidential office of Ukraine. In addition to the information efforts we make, we sent out to other foreign ministries diplomatic notice about the new memorable day in Russia, outlining its importance to our people in context of preservation of the memory of victims of World War II. Similar notes were received by foreign embassies in Moscow. One more important report. On April 9th, Malalume, the Republic of Zimbabwe, saw an official ceremony of giving to the Zimbabwean side food aid. 352 tons of peas and 117 tons of sunflower oil provided within the Russian contribution to the World Food Organization program of the UN through Russian AMERCOM. Such facilitation is aimed at expanding possibilities to provide food and protect the most vulnerable groups of the population. This is the foundation for the food security for African states. On April 15th through 23rd, the Mendeleev Olympiad is taking place in Moscow. This tournament is unique because it dates back to all USSR Chemical Olympiad and continues its traditions and enumeration. The last year, the Olympiad was hosted in the CIS countries, China and Brazil. The organizers of Olympiad are the Chemical Faculty of Moscow State University and the Andrei Melnichenko Foundation since 2017. This year, Moscow is visited by teams from more than 35 countries. Russia is represented by a team of 15 school children selected from the winners of the All-Russia Olympiad on chemistry. This Olympiad is a unique opportunity for talented children to unlock their potential. we hope that it will help deepen international educational interaction for the interests of the whole humanity. One more announce on April 22nd. The International Media Forum Russia-Turkey will take place. It will be organized by the Union of Journalists of Moscow with the facilitation of the Gorchakov Public Diplomacy Fund. It is titled Russia-Turkey 105 Years and Counting. The program will include a plenary session titled Russia-Turkey Political Dialogue and the Public Context of Partnership in the 21st Century, and other sections on humanitarian cooperation, international relations, digital media transformation, cultural exchanges, scientific and educational projects, and youth initiatives. We wish all the participants fruitful work and interesting discussions for the benefit of strengthening our bilateral relations. And April 22nd through 25th, St. Petersburg will host the forum, International Forum of Overseeing Bodies and Public Sector. The aim of the forum is to promote initiatives to increase the quality of state-public partnership and international cooperation of the competent bodies, financial institutions, and non-finance organizations. The forum will discuss a lot of topics, new approaches and technologies used by the systems of internal control on due check of clients, data storage, risk evaluation of money laundering, financing terrorism, financing of weapons of mass destruction, proliferation, as well as the use of other preventive measures, risk-oriented approach in overseeing activities, identification of beneficiary owners, as well as the non-finance companies and professions, the development of expert potential of the specialist of national anti-money laundering systems, strengthening of international cooperation of overseeing bodies in expanding possibilities to exchange the data. Within the forum, we also plan to hold a round table of representatives of the national bodies of bank overseeing and units of finance intelligence, consultations of the competent bodies of the 5 member states, learning about the work of the Center of Sberbank Compliance Center. There's necessity of interaction between the competent bodies and representatives of the organizations in risk evaluation of money laundering, terrorism financing, proliferation and weapons of mass destruction, as well as the belongs to developing international standards, evolution of risk of money laundering and financing terrorism. Interest is seen in the growing number of participants and their geography. This year, representatives from the Middle East, North America, and other parts of the world are expected. The working languages of forum will be Russian, English, Arab, and French. There's one more important piece of information. In the National Center of Russia, with the support of the presidential administration of the Russian Federation, will host the future of the world, the future of the new platform for global growth. Now, an open dialogue is an international platform to discuss the future of global economy, uniting the recognized experts and those who wishes to present their vision for the future of the global order. The initiative was supported by the President Vladimir Putin during the application period to the second open dialogue. More than 1,600 works from 100 countries in the world was received. They were written on 4 topics: investments in people, environment, cohesion and technology. Following the competition, 100 authors were selected to participate to the event in Moscow in person. Deputy head of the administration of President of the Russian Federation, Maxim Oreshkin, will attend the second open dialogue. The event will also feature ideas of the essay authors, lectures of international speakers, and busy youth and cultural program. The link will be available in the text of the briefing. I'm ready to answer your questions. Is the international affairs with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Recently, Emmanuel Macron said that France and Great Britain jointly will work, as he said, on the peaceful multinational mission to restore navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. But this mission, as he says, won't have anything to do with the sides of the conflict. What can you say about this initiative? In my opinion, we can establish a separate section, the ideas of Macron, and comment on them regularly, because it is not the first time that I have to answer the question what the ideas of the President of France are about the establishment of coalitions, missions, and so on. No regional crisis was spared from his comments. He constantly says that he is going to convene a conference to organize a breakthrough format of multilateral cooperation. But in the recent years, I cannot remember any of his initiatives lead to practical results or real changes, so that they help anyone or anything, for example, to settle a conflict, or at the very least to significantly decrease tensions. The ideas are numerous, but in reality we see something different. That's what we can say. We have a lot of questions. Paris imitates a lot of activities, and they want to create the visibility of the activities, the impression that they act. These tactics backfires. The French diplomacy has cements its reputation as a player that holds international meetings for the sake of meetings themselves, or sometimes even simply for PR purposes. You know, the art for the sake of the art. And there's a name for this. It's decadence. In any case, this approach of Paris to international crisis is wrong. France, together with Great Britain, attempts to create a coalition of the willing without taking into account the opinion of Russia, and contrary to its position that was expressed unequivocally. And now the French does not want to agree upon their ideas to establish a mission to restore navigation through the conflict of Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz. So with the sides involved, first of all, with Iran, it is clear that it is not a viable project as it is. Paris does not want to implement an initiative for the good, but they want to express an idea and to use it for their own interest.
And this, as you know, is called hype in English. Thank you very much. Is Ria Novosti with us? Yes, good evening. Christina Rodriguez. We have a following question that recently is published a blue book on foreign policy. We would like to ask you to comment on the passages in regards to Russia, in regards to the illegal occupation of Kuril Island, and the responsibility for countries for the declaration or for degradation of the bilateral relations in regards to the conflict in Ukraine. This is the traditional trend, and I would call it the blue book on the foreign policy, in brackets Japan. Once again, Tokyo has published a new edition of the yearly blue, where they once again outline the unacceptable wordings about our country. In recent years, we saw these illustrate the lack of change in the foreign policy course of Japan's and Russian track. After, in 2025, the ruling coalition headed by the Prime Minister Takaichi came into power. This militant and hostile rhetoric testifies to the constant attempts of Japan to reject the commonly accepted results of the Second World War. They are always citing some perceived threats emanating from Russia and other countries. Neighboring states, Tokyo thus is trying to justify their own steps to have a speedy remilitarization of their forces, and this is fraught with serious risks for the stability and prosperity of the region. I would like to underline once again that South Kuril Islands are an intrinsic part of the Russian Federation. They have been annexed as a result of the Second World War, the outcomes of which have been enshrined in the Charter of the UN. And I think this phrase, I should learn this by heart in Japanese for them in Tokyo to finally get it. The Russian sovereignty over these islands is indisputable and is grounded in the international legal framework. As for the current situation in the Russian-Japanese relations, and who exactly is responsible for the degradation, I would only just remind everyone that this degradation has led to our relations falling to a very deep level. And in regards to those who is responsible, Tokyo is that due to the fact that they have ramped down all measures of interaction with Russia. Why did they do that? Because they, for some reason, connected it with the situation around Ukraine. Why did they do that, and for what reason? The question should be better asked to the Japanese representative. I think they were just ordered to do this by those. If we look at the complement of the US military base in Japan, the US view this country not as a sovereign one, but one of their numerous backyards, or side yards, whatever they call it. I think that during the meeting of President Trump and Prime Minister Takaichi, this was obvious for everyone. The Japanese side should understand that the Japanese government should prove that they have rejected the unfriendly course towards Russia by some practical steps taken that should be recognized by us. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is the Chinese Media Corporation with us right now? Yes, Madam Zakharova. We had small technical problems with video. I will ask my question without camera. I see your background, but with pleasure I'll take your question. We have two questions today. This day, the two-day visit of Mr. Lavrov to Beijing has concluded when he had meetings with his counterpart Wang Yi. They have discussed relevant national agenda and bilateral relations. How does the Russian MFA evaluate the outcome of these meetings, and how this close coordination between Beijing and Moscow in the framework of BRICS SCO and the associations in the Far East requiring close coordination in strategic security. How is this developing? You rightly mentioned that the two-day visit of Mr. Lavrov to China has concluded. He met with the President of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, and we had 4-hour conversation with his counterpart, distinguished Wang Yi. And the result, in the aftermath from those negotiations, there was a 1.5-hour press conference to Chinese journalists. It's available in the video or text format at our website. He responded to questions, and briefly I will use the quote of Mr. Lavrov to respond to your question. He said the following: Russia and China are playing a stabilizing role in those tendencies that are currently fighting for survival in international life. And the key is in interaction, which has a stabilizing role to promote the ideals of justice, mutual, equal rights, non-interference into sovereign affairs of the other, respect for rights of peoples for the self-determination and the choice of their own path for development. And this is not simply enshrined in a bilateral style. It's enshrined in the UN Charter, which our countries are not canceling, are not trying to rewrite, and are not making excuses to not follow. On the contrary, we respect it, and we do everything to implement it and preserve it for future generations and active practical work. Thank you very much. I managed to fix my issues, and my second question is, as a key player in the world energy market, from the standpoint of international law, how does Russia evaluate the actions of the United States on the interception of ships navigating through the Hormuz Strait? Iran has already stated that such actions are infringing upon the sovereignty and are violating the UN Charter. Some countries have already been voting against this blockade. What threats are these actions can result in for the international energy security? We have already mentioned that the Persian Gulf countries are very important for world economy from the standpoint of shipments of energy resources, and so there are negative consequences of the American and Israeli aggression for the world energy and food markets and the sustainability of supply chains. Currently, we understand that everything is influenced by these actions. So in regards to the actions of the United States from the standpoint of national law, according to the UN Charter, the introduction of the maritime blockade is possible only through the corresponding resolution of the UNSC as one of the collective measures to restore and support national peace and security. Has anything been adhered to from that list? There has not been a single decision of the UNSC in that regard. If we are talking about the blockade of ports and coasts of Iran with the use of armed forces, such actions are unequivocally can be designated as an manifestation of aggression. The measures of the United States to introduce a maritime blockade of the Hormuz Strait, being it the interception of ships or blocking of Iranian ports, should be viewed as unilateral and illegal measures from the standpoint of both the UN Charter and international maritime law and law of the sea. This is another interpretation of Washington of international legal framework that will only escalate the conflict. The legal character of the actions with the states doesn't mean that Washington can act in some sort of legal vacuum. In that regard, I'd like to remind everyone, including the US authorities, regarding the inadmissibility of violation of applicable norms of national humanitarian law. When the American leadership, military leadership, is publicly saying the rules of warfare complete nonsense, we shouldn't expect any sound mind. The U.S. War Secretary Pete Hegseth numerously said that there are no stupid rules of engagement in his speeches. Perhaps he was not talking about war. Perhaps he was talking about relations to the opposite sex. Who knows? So he said that in his briefing of March 2nd. He also mentioned this in his book, that War with Warriors, what the truth about the treason of people ensuring our freedom. When speaking about the Geneva Convention of 1945, he mentioned that American soldiers shouldn't fight according to the rules written by elderly men in the halls laden with redwood 80 years ago. End of quote. I think it's weird to think that since something was written a long time ago by some venerable men, that should mean that it has those notions are outdated. That way you can reach the very things that are civilizational code of entirety of humanity. Thank you very much for your answer. Thank you. Is Reuters with us right now? Yes, Madam Zakharova, good evening. You have already partly mentioned my upcoming question in your response to CGTN, but nevertheless I will ask it. The blockade of the Hormuz Strait by the US Navy, how does this blockade influence the interests of Russia in the region, the shipments of Russian energy, the world energy and food security? And what does Russia intend to do in that regard? Well, I don't know. You are surprising me or astonishing me or everything together. It's an interesting question. We already pointed out that the resources of the Persian Gulf countries have traditionally occupied a significant share in the world energy balance. The main artery for shipping of all those goods was the Hormuz Strait, and for more than a month already, the navigation of ships in the region has been practically suspended due to the unprovoked armed aggression of the United States and Israel against Iran. And this led to what this has led to and what their reactions. Let's look at the numbers. This deprived the world market of 1/5 of all oil. This deprived the world market of more than 30% of liquid natural gas and 40% of helium. And as I understand, it's not only about balloons, about color balloons, or urea, 42% of urea, 44% of sodium, and ammonia and many phosphates are also affected. We're talking about a significant number of enterprises, industries all around the world. And is this very moment exactly when we see a nascent new harvest, new planting period, of course with some climate peculiarities, of course, but these supplies are in high demand. This conflict has also led to destructive consequences for the regional and global trade routes. This has damaged world energy markets, inflicted damage to the industrial and agricultural domains of many countries, decreasing their investment attractiveness. I would also point out the physical deficit and the price hike for energy, disruption of transport, logistical chains, the growing tension and, for state budgets and ordinary citizens. In regards to food security, the natural gas prices are negatively influencing this situation because it's used in nitrous nitric fertilizer, which has led to significant growth of price for these fertilizers since the beginning of the year. We are also seeing forecasts for the price hikes for basic food products, and there are some forecasts, if the situation continues in the same vein, for the lack of such food products. Previously, we saw a different situation, that everything was fine with the Hormuz Strait, but there was lack of harvest or drought or torrential rains, on the other hand, or other cataclysm, etc., etc. We don't know the full extent of the consequences, but we need to hear the analysts, listen to them, the UN experts, for example, the people that are competent enough to publish their opinions. Different regions experience different influence of the conflict. There has been a very difficult situation in the Asian countries that are natural importers of hydrocarbons from the Middle Eastern countries, and immediately this created deficit for physical shipments of oil and gas. So the common price growth has significantly hampered the maritime logistics. It's just terrible to hear those prices, and the same goes for the insurance companies and their premiums. This is a veritable tragedy for some operators. There has been a resource deficit coupled with the growth of expenses for transport, which influences all sectors of economy and undermines the economic growth of states. In regards to Europe, I just wanted to remind everyone of the words of the European Commissar on Energy and Household Building, Dan Jorgensen, that additional measures the EU has to take to import hydrocarbons have already amounted to 14 billion euros. This is all a result of incredibly, monstrously short-sighted in its stupidity policy of the EU and Brussels to reject Russian energy resources that still is not changed even in the face of the current situation. The countries that have been constructively engaging with Russian energy sphere for the last years have been less affected by this conflict. I mentioned that in the beginning of March, when the price for energy hiked immediately, we saw publications in the Western media that is a demonstration that the main beneficiary of this conflict is Russia. And we talked with you that you can make things up as long as you want. Think of some concepts, but the fact is a fact. It wasn't Russia that didn't supply its energy resources. It wasn't Russia that forced them to reject those energy resources. It wasn't Russia that forbade itself or someone else to buy or transfer those resources. No, it was those countries that I already mentioned, for example, the countries of the EU, or those who have yielded to the corresponding pressure and stopped purchasing a very quality product with easily predictable prices, and moreover stably shipped Russian energy. That's their own problem now, as well as the problem of those who have yielded to the pressure and corresponding to the Western policy. So the ones who didn't yield, they actually became they joined the winning side. We're talking about the CIS countries that are stably importing Russian energy and fuel, fertilizer, electric energy, etc., which helps them to go through the current crisis and continue to carry out their political and societal tasks. There's, of course, one state that I just stated that they intended to withdraw from the CIS, namely Moldova, that rejected the constructive cooperation package with Russia and adopted the EU policy completely. There are, of course, some corresponding outcomes that they saw a physical deficit of fuel and the immediate growth in its price.
Russia remains a responsible participant of the global energy market. We are fulfilling our obligations. We are open to the dialogue to maintain security, energy security, and prevention of the energy crisis. Thank you. Thank you. Is it Vestia with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have one question today. The leader of the TISA Hungarian party who won the elections on April the 12th, Peter Magyar, thinks that EU should lift sanctions against Russia. Let us quote him correctly. Yes. Right after the end of the conflict in Ukraine. Indeed. At the press conference in Budapest, he expressed a hope that the Ukrainian conflict will be settled peacefully. Can sanctions become the key factor in resetting relations between Russia and Europe? Can we return to the previous level of economic cooperation between Russia and EU in future? Well, let us see into the sanctions. What do you mean when you ask about this? I don't understand your question. What does this mean in your opinion? We have not introduced sanctions against the EU first. We only imposed sanctions as a response to the sanctions. We have always said that all the sanctions in circumvention of the UN Security Council are illegal. But we won't discuss this amid their frenzy. There's no point talking about it. They defeated themselves strategically when they introduced sanctions against Russia. Now we can see that we have never done anything that can be a sign of Russia's aggression and our aspiration to have to wage any kind of economic wars. We will protect our economy, production. We will look for possibilities. We won't knock to in the closed door, but we won't refuse interaction with anyone based on a mutually respectful and beneficial dialogue. Why talk about it now? There's reality, there's actions. We'll proceed from real facts and actions. Can we go back to the previous level of economic cooperation between Russia and the EU? There's no point talking about it. I'll remind you, all our leaders said that trust and to those who betrayed both themselves and our relations, who shook hands and at the same time did something aggressive. There's no sense in doing that. We won't abandon the principle of equal and mutually respectful dialogue with everyone who is prepared to have it. There's a saying of Sergei Lavrov. In their current stage, any conversation with them is not possible, simply because they first have to get over their emotions. This is a very good characteristic of the emotional state right now. There's one more quote of Russian President Vladimir Putin. He said that our country has never refused ties with the European Union. At the same time, the policy of Brussels of sanctions pressure and the use of restrictive measures to the against the Russian products damaged themselves significantly. In 2021, the bilateral trade turnover was some 253 billion euros. Last year, in 2025, this figure was 58 billion euros. Brussels, disregarding the damage to the EU member states, continues to sever trade ties with Russia. This is crazy physical torture of themselves. And now their agenda includes the total refusal of the Russian gas and oil. What are we talking here? That's what they are doing. There's one more thing we have to consider. Many niches that Russian markets, that the Russian products, that European companies had on the Russian market now belong to our partners from other countries or to the Russian business, the business of our businessmen, despite we have to respect our entrepreneurs. There are two reasons here. Sometimes they worked in very unfavorable conditions and they protected their business or national interests. They're very resilient in withstanding to blackmail, threats, and so on and so forth. Politicians in the EU countries who faced with the results of their activities and at the very same time have not even the right but ability to protect their true national interests, they speak very cautiously in favor of lifting sanctions and building, as they say, in future. We all see this. Russia is prepared to develop contacts that reflect our own interests with certain member states of this alliance on the condition that the latter will follow the civilized methods of business and will abandon anti-Russian hysteria imposed by the Russophobes in the EU if they behave properly, follow the UN Charter provisions, and make business in a mutually respectful way when they finally remember the tips of their predecessors who cared about the prosperity of the EU, did not want the collapse of the EU. And those who made their own people suffer. No one will talk to these people. But if they remember the best practices of their predecessors on the above-mentioned principles that were later enshrined in the UN Charter, which are the code of civilized relations, well, they have this chance in that case. Our interests must be considered. Thank you. Thank you. Is Ukraine.ru with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. Ukraine.ru. We have two questions to follow up on this topic about the EU who should behave properly without Russophobia. Sergei Lavrov said that Russia is open to the dialogue with the new government in Hungary. However, we will see how the Budapest pursues their own national interests. When the EU speaks about a lot of things, they want a place at the negotiation table, or that they are about to call to Moscow, that some time ago they wanted to make a decision to continue negotiations, the relations. There have been a cartoon about a small a piglet on the Christmas tree. He was allowed to a party, but he broke everything there, and then he was banished from the party. When they behave like this, who is going to have any kind of relationship with them if they behave improperly? Who is going to give any kind of prospects to them if they betrayed their own interests? Even they first should learn to behave themselves in a civilized society, to be responsible for their own words. Today we talked about Emmanuel Macron a lot, for example. We remembered the agreements of the German leaders. From Washington to Brussels to London and so on and so forth, they should learn to be responsible for their own words and actions. Probably they even should correct their own mistakes, recognize all their criminal acts, and make a general conclusion, not about their criminal behavior. I am sorry, Madam Zakharova. I absolutely agree with you, and we don't need anyone else. This is just a fact. You talked a lot about Ukraine today, about those terrible things committed by the Kiev regime. Now our subscribers deem it very important if Magyar is going to endorse the loan to Ukraine worth 19 billion. Is it going to influence diplomatic relations between Russia and Hungary? What will influence the endorsement of the loan? Oh no! If we had a lot of ifs, and we know how it ends. We are not talking in such terms. Any restrictive measures, as we said many times, damage the EU and their people. Look at the GDP growth of the EU. It is lower than the average in the world. Lower. It is very important. When I'm asked why I'm mentioning the EU, but Russia is the country that is subject to more than 35,000 sanctions. We are the country the hybrid war is waged against. The trade war is waged against us. But their loss of rates of economic growth is not caused by our aggressive policy, but by measures that they imposed against us or other countries. Do you understand the difference here? This is a very interesting paradox of our life. But in the Russian language, there's a saying, don't do bad to other things, or the same thing will happen to you. The GDP increased in the EU only by 1.5%. This year it is predicted to be less than 1%. Countries that were the locomotives of the economic growth, Germany and France namely, show even smaller dynamics. the GDP growth is less than 1%. This is the slowing down of the economy in the EU. And one thing that is even worse for the EU is deindustrialization. And it happened not because there was some coalition of the willing to inflict a strategic defeat on the EU. This is caused by their terrible incompetence. They allowed to strip themselves of a vital indicator of their own independence. They have always pursued the policy of colonialism against other countries, and now they de facto became colonized countries. And these are not my words. These are the words of the representatives of Belgium. He asked, what do they want, to continue being happy vassals or poor and sad slaves? As to Hungary, in particular, we appreciate the policy of Viktor Orban based on national interest. It, despite the pressure of Brussels and other EU countries, pursued pragmatic foreign political policy, and he protected not Russia's interest, but interests of his own people. He is known for his balanced approach to difficult international situation. And many things coincided with Russia's point of view. Some things were not the same, but we still saw him taking steps in the context of the national interests of Hungary. He is also known for his balanced approach to and clear understanding of the causes of the conflict in Ukraine. The coup d'etat in the country and the puppet character of the regime in Kiev. On April the 12th, Hungary saw the elections to the State Assembly. The opposition Party of Respect and Freedom won. In line with the constitution, its leader, Peter Magyar, will have to shape a new government in May this year. We deem it sensible to wait until his program documents are published and judged by certain acts. Russia respects the results of expression of will of the Hungarian people. The leadership of our country is prepared to dialogue with the cabinet of Peter Magyar based on pragmatic approach and mutual consideration of interests on a wide range of issues of international bilateral agenda. That's what was said many times by now. It was also mentioned by Sergei Lavrov during his press conference yesterday. Madam Zakharova, thank you very much. Thanks to you. Is Tao News with us? Yes, we are here. In 2026, relations between Georgia and the European Union remain tense. There's expectations that the frozen financial aid of the EU will continue, as well as there will be additional sanctions, especially after the Hungarian opposition came to power in Budapest. But Georgia continues to become a part of the EU. How will this influence Russia-Georgia relations?
You know, as you said, the persistent desire of Georgia to enter the EU, accede to the EU, perhaps this question would be better addressed to the Georgian authorities or people of Georgia. On our end, it's unclear to us how Tbilisi can be desiring to join an association that are using sanctions against Georgia, that are provoking it into a new, novel anti-Russian military adventures, and openly supposing the attempts to organize a coup d'etat in Georgia, who are trying to impose untraditional, non-traditional values alien to the Georgian people, forcing the country for the financial, economic levers to reject Georgia, to reject Georgian culture and its tradition. The EU is trying to force Georgia towards the abyss, a high cliff. What else should they do to make it obvious, finally, what true intentions they have towards Georgia? So the policy of Brussels doesn't surprise us even a single bit. We have grown accustomed to them preferring neocolonial methods based on sanctions and blackmail, demanding third countries complete unconditional submission. They are not even spending money anymore. They used to give some money, and now they are first making demands, and only then saying that we don't have any more money, proceeds straight to forceful negotiation. And what we are seeing in regards to Georgia is only one example that was in due time true for several other countries. The membership of any country in the EU is only possible, and it should be understood clearly, that they transfer some part of the national sovereignty to Brussels. And what we see with the EU countries now, no matter what we're talking about, the old Europe, the countries that have been in the EU for decades, or the countries that have only recently joined, no matter all of them were forced to relinquish some of their sovereignty in favor of Brussels, not in favor of rational solutions or economic gain, not even in favor of, I don't know, some future projects, but just it was demanded so. Not because of national conscience, not because of sovereignty and identity, because this doesn't mean anything for Brussels, because it shouldn't hamper the implementation of the collective Brussels project that is backed not by votes of Europeans or national interests of European countries, but a clear directive and political interests of the select group of people. We see at the head of the table they put the joining anti-Russian sanctions as an indispensable instrument in joining the EU. We're not just talking about anti-Russian sanctions, these are illegitimate sanctions and bypassing the resolutions of the UNSC. What will this signify for Georgia in the midterm? Perhaps we could talk about, we would primarily see the cessation of direct flights between our countries, many other consequences. This has been, and I think this is not something that they want to see, because we saw many tourists, businesses, and others visiting both countries. And why would they relinquish it only to appease the European Union? There would be a significant reduction in cargo traffic at the demand of the European Union. If that not will be the case, let anyone in the EU to comment on it and prove us wrong. It would be very interesting to listen to them. They will never say, of course, they will never say this openly. Every 25% of all tourists in Georgia are from Russia. Those are very grateful tourists, very financially stable tourists that are able to bring their friends to Georgia, who also in their turn become great appreciators of Georgian cuisine, for example, Georgian culture, to architecture and history of Georgia. And the accession of Georgia to the EU, with the consideration of the destructive demands of the EU, would be significantly hampering the tourist industry of Georgia and would threaten the contacts between relatives living in our two countries. They would perhaps lose the ability to visit each other. Remember how everyone was going to some third countries, how much money was spent? That's what their goal is at the EU, to force people, entire countries and ethnicities to adopt these sanctions. Also, Georgia would be forced to join the energy embargo towards our country. I think this energy embargo is not towards Russia, but towards themselves, because the EU countries should have already forbidden themselves to use Russian energy. Russia is one of the most reliable suppliers of oil products and natural gas to Georgia. The sad situation we see with the energy market in the EU, I think we commented enough on that. Would it be better in their camp, not due to any particular actions on our part, but only because that's what they chose as their future? The accession to the EU would also mean Georgia losing its preferential trade regime with Russia and CIS countries that are main markets for Georgia. 70% of Georgian exports are sent not to European Union, but rather to the CIS countries. Not due to the fact that the products of Georgia is bad in any way. No, it is very good. We are active consumers of it. It would be due to the factors of of it being forbidden to ship goods to those countries. Also, Russia would be forced, and I would like to underline this fact, that we will be forced to include Georgia into the list of countries with unfriendly regimes and spread our economic measures with all corresponding consequences for Georgian producers of wine, mineral water and fruit and everything that's being brought into our country. Our country is also responsible for 80% of all grain used in Georgia. Acceding to the EU, Tbilisi would be required to introduce tariff on our grain, which would provoke the growth of bread price.
Вступление в Европейский Союз Грузия была бы вынуждена участвовать в схемах военной поддержки Украины. А я каждый брифинг рассказываю, сколько они требуют от каждой страны, члена Европейского Союза, денег
with a special place, the 6th International Chinese Expo of Consumer Goods. We are helping Russian business circles by any means to participate in this event. We hope this platform will provide more opportunities for entrepreneurs of both countries to familiarize with each other and broaden their interaction. We also invite our Chinese partners to participate in large expo events in territory of the country. I'm talking about the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, June 3rd, June 6th, in St. Petersburg, the Eastern Economic Forum, September 1st to September 4th in Vladivostok, the Caucasus Investment Forum from April 28th to April 30th in the city of Mineralny Vody, the Russian Energy Week. We still have time before it starts because it will take place on October 14th, 16th in Moscow. Inoprom, for example, July 6th, July 9th in Yekaterinburg. And of course, the Rostki Forum in August 17th, 18th in the city of Kazan, and many other events that are traditionally eliciting increased interest on the part of Chinese participants. We hope that intense exchanges through business will be successful in promoting the whole package of Russian-Chinese cooperation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is international reporters with us? Yes. I have two questions today. Recently, I was in the maritime memorial in Piero. They are practically rehabilitating Friedrich Gattenauer, Kriegsmarine commander who fought against the USSR. They are also talking about the new role of German fleet after February 2022. What do you think? Is it linked with anti-Russian sentiments and the militarization of Germany? My second question, in Italy, there was recently an RT Dog Festival. After that, the Vice President of the European Parliament, Picerno and Calenda, criticized this initiative and accused the Italian government of inaction. And some media asked for measures to be taken against Vincenzo Russo, one of the organizers of the event. Do you think it leads to increased censorship in Italy? Let's start with the second question, please. I think this is true madness that we're witnessing. I wouldn't ever think that the country home to incredible cultural personalities. We should remember Raphael, Michelangelo, of course, but not in the least. We should also remember that it has been home to great film directors, Fellini, Antonioni, and many others that have changed the world cinematography. I couldn't imagine